Facebook Cambridge Analytica Town Hall Forum. This, for some of you who attended the one previously we did on FBI versus Apple, this is our second town hall. And this particular one is co-sponsored by the Cyber Working Group and the Data Analytics Cross-Divisional Working Group. So with that short introduction, I'm going to turn the floor over to David Nichols, who will be our moderator for today.
Thank you, Margaret. Hi. I'd like to welcome you to this forum. I think this is a very timely and important topic. There are perhaps two issues here. One of those is privacy. I talked to a young woman the other day who has children. Naturally enough, she used her iPhone to take pictures of those children. Takes a lot of pictures of those children. There's an app on the iPhone, which was on the iPhone to begin with. She didn't get it specially, which is a very helpful app. What it does is it identifies the people that she's taken pictures of and groups them because it uses facial recognition software. Okay? It used that software without her asking. All right? What else might it use such information for? Because after all, phones are connected to other things. Strikes me as a little creepy. Speaking of which, let me take care of one detail. This is my iPhone. This is what's called a Faraday bag. So you can take this and you can put it in here because my research into this topic shows me my very, very helpful and convenient friend here is also a very inquisitive friend and kind of a blabbermouth. So in it goes. As they say, just because you're paranoid does not mean they're not out to get you. The truth is, we constantly emit data now. When we travel, when we browse, what emails we send, what calls we make, who our friends are, what news articles we read. Those data are diligently gathered up and analyzed. So you get helpful traffic updates, restaurant suggestions, ads, reminders of appointments, etc., etc., etc. And this is the nice side of this. We emit so much data, and the analytic tools are so powerful nowadays that companies like Amazon are reportedly patenting starting to ship stuff to you before you order it. Okay, think about that. They're that confident about what you think. All right? The paranoid in the past made little hats like this. All right? Now, perhaps, people don't have to read your minds to know what you're thinking. And the companies that do this don't necessarily have your best interests at heart. Okay? Perhaps it's been suggested to me that fiduciarily they're required to make money off of the data that they gather on you. All right? Our insurance bills, for example, could be adjusted based upon our driving habits. I bought a nice car recently, which I truly love. It offered me, it did at least ask, it said, would you like to share how you're driving this new sports car with insurance companies so that we can lower your rates? At least it had the decency to ask. I'm pretty sure that this iPhone here gathers all the same information about how fast I'm going, and what worries me is this hasn't asked. This brings me to the second issue which we'll be dealing with here. Improper influence. Already, criminals gather data on family members who travel, so you get a phone call which says that this person's in jail. Send money right now. All right? And they can do this because data is gathered on you, your family, people that you know. Imagine a case where somebody gathers data to determine who among us is emotionally fragile. And then they send messages to those people to make that emotional fragility worse, suggesting suicide or whatever. All right? I bring this up with some horrific example. It is technically possible And if it's technically possible, shouldn't we think about our society? Beyond the personal, we live in a society where sometimes votes are very close. Brexit is a good example. There are other elections around the world which have been influenced, okay, by other people. It is possible, I think, that Facebook, the Cambridge Analytica Facebook incident, has revealed potentially a vulnerability in our society which we need to address. So, in this forum, we will examine the Facebook Cambridge Analytica incident from both privacy and undue influence perspectives. We will describe what happened from a technical, a legal, a national security science perspective. I think it'll be provoking and illuminating. To help us, we have three panelists. So, Arnold Abraham, who's on the far side here, was at the forefront of early developments of information warfare and cyber warfare strategy and policy for the DoD going back to the mid-90s. He finished his government career running the intelligence analysis effort for Cybercom. In his relatively new role as the founder of the Cyber Law Group, he focuses on cyber disputes such as data breaches, identity theft, through litigation and mediation. So he'll be presenting the legal view. James Bishop, who's closest to me here, suspects, and I'm quoting him, that his presence on this panel is a cruel joke. He told me, a total of 3 Facebook friends, and his desire to cultivate a social network evaporated in his early teens when he discovered you could play the card game Magic: The Gathering anonymously over the internet. Or so he thought. His desire to explore legal topics, which is the second perspective, evaporated when after choosing a pre-law major, acing his LSAT and getting into law school, he actually found out what being a lawyer would be like. As far as national security, he showed his great depth in that during his interview here, where he was asked, why do you want to work here? And he said, you have fighter jets, right? And despite being the director of IDA's Enclave for Data that contains personally identifiable information, and his second favorite book being titled Learning from Data, he's still not sure how the word is pronounced or pluralized. Priscilla Guthrie, who's in the middle here, first encounter with the ugly side of information sharing was in 1980. She was running TRW's East Coast computing services when she got a 3 a.m. phone call from the security force. The Fairfax County Police were at the facility with guns drawn, accusing her systems of taking down their emergency communications. This provided hard lessons in what we now call the insider threat, personal identifiable information, and denial of service. In the early 90s, Priscilla had a run-in with the now-deceased Senator Stevens of Alaska. She thought the internet might just change government processes. He insisted that, 1, the US had invented the internet and understood the technology, therefore, and 2, the government would never use the internet because many citizens would never be able to use the internet. For example, people on fishing boats. More recently, Priscilla's been having nightmares about what could happen next as she and her assigned OPM restoration expert attempted to work through the tangled trail left by people who've been using her identity. All of us appreciate that you came, and we will try our best. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. Today, we will start with a statement from each panelist based on their particular perspective. This will be followed by a moderated session in which I'll ask some questions, and if there's time remaining, we'll have some questions from the audience. So, James, would you start us off?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? I'm going to bring this close until I see everybody nodding. Can you hear me? Okay? Good? Okay. So as David said, I have some kind of prepared statement here, and then from there it'll get moderated, and then whatever questions, so it'll unravel as we go. If you develop an app for Facebook, you can use an API provided by Facebook to access profile information on the users of your app. Back in 2014, you could also get information on those users' friends. In that year, in 2014, Alexander Kogan and colleagues, they created a Facebook app. It was called This Is Your Digital Life. It consisted of a personality test, personality quiz, because the internet didn't have enough of those, right? Yeah. And they used Amazon Mechanical Turk, and they recruited about 270,000 people, paid them about $1 or $2 each to take the quiz. These were all Facebook users. And those people had 87 million friends. And Kogan could get the profile information on all of those people. So he did. And he shared that data with Cambridge Analytica, a British consulting firm. Later in 2014, this is before any scandal, any story breaking about any of this, Facebook disabled some of the API functionality. If you're an app developer, you could no longer get access to information on all the friends of the user, just the friends that were using your app. There were other sensitive types of information that you could not get about a user. Now, the scandal broke first in December 2015, when The Guardian reported that Kogan gave that data to Cambridge Analytica. That was a breach. Facebook had not agreed that he would be able to share that data with a consulting firm. And when Facebook learned about this report, and they claimed that this was the first time they learned about it, they asked Kogan and Cambridge Analytica to delete the data. And when Kogan and Cambridge Analytica said they complied, Facebook believed them, or it says that they did. And in 2018, multiple reports were that they in fact had not deleted the data and had used it to help political campaigns. Cambridge Analytica denied that they had not deleted the data. Facebook banned Kogan and Cambridge Analytica from the Facebook platform, and they audited their app developers, and they further restricted the API. They also removed partner categories, which linked individual data from data vendors to Facebook profiles. So for example, when you use a loyalty card at a grocery store, that data is recorded and put in a database, and the owners of these databases, companies like Axiom and Experian, they sell that data, who you are and what you bought, to companies like Facebook. Facebook itself claims that they don't sell data, and I believe them. So why would they care so much to get all this data if they don't sell it? Now, a PR-friendly answer, a common answer from Facebook, is that they want to connect people to other people. Another answer is that they want to connect people to advertisements. And the same information that would do one is valuable to do the other. So Facebook does not sell data. They don't sell developer accounts. They don't sell personal connections. All of these they give away for free. However, they do sell ads. They offer tailored advertising strategies. For example, if you're an advertiser on Facebook, you can target users that live in a specific area or like a certain product or company or some combination of those things. And if you have a list of customers or members or donors, you can upload it. And Facebook can find those people and their friends for you. And you can target those people. And targeted advertisements, tailored advertisements are very valuable. So Facebook makes a bunch of money off of them. Cambridge Analytica sought a targeted advertising strategy that would cause people to vote for a political candidate. They had profile information and personality quiz results for about 270,000 people. And they had the profile information for about 87 million people. So if you can connect the profile information to the personality test results, build some kind of model, then you can take the people where you only have profile information and infer what their test results would have been. So that's what Alexander Kogan did. The personality test results corresponded to the big 5 personality traits common in psychology. And Kogan built a model to use Facebook profile information as a predictor of those traits. So one technical problem here is that Facebook profile information is very high dimensional. Any different thing you can like on Facebook is a new dimension of data. It could be a new column in a data set. Right? That's not going to be helpful for making a predictive model. It's going to be hard to have enough memory to build a model to take account of all of those different dimensions of data. So what do? You do dimension reduction. And that's what Kogan did. You take all of these different things someone could like and you reduce it down to some smaller number of features, maybe 100, maybe 1,000. Right? This sounds just like a technical detail, but it's not just a technical detail. It raises legal and policy implications. Remember, Facebook asked Kogan and Cambridge Analytica to delete the data. What is the data? Is it exactly what Kogan ripped using the API from Facebook database? Right? And then he transformed it. He made this dimension reduced data set. What about that? Does he have to delete that? What about the model that he created based on that data? Does he have to delete that? Note that none of the analysis here has anything directly to do with how people vote. Kogan attempted to link profile information to Big 5 personality traits. There's another link here, which is Big 5 personality traits to voting behavior. That's a big leap. And there was no attempt here to do that with Facebook data directly. They didn't have the data to do something like that. One firm uniquely does have the data to do something like that. That's Facebook. So while researchers like Kogan and Cambridge Analytica, they don't have the data to achieve that holy grail, Facebook uniquely does. So Facebook knows what characteristics you've given it by having a profile and generally browsing the internet. And it knows what ads you've seen, and it knows what you've bought. And so with this combination of information on millions of users, including all of your friends, Facebook can estimate how much an ad would change your probability of purchasing a specific product. Now about voting, they may not know exactly how you voted, but they can probably have a pretty good idea based on everything else they know about you. You might reveal that information through your posts, your likes, or your browsing history. Oh, and Facebook tracks your browsing history on every site with a like button, or what's called a Facebook pixel. Even if you aren't a Facebook user. Even if you don't have an account on Facebook, Facebook has an account on you. Facebook already employs predictive modeling in just about every facet of its operations. Any user action is an outcome that can be predicted. What friends you add, what you like, what you post, when you log in. And they own massive data storage and analysis capability to work with that data and to use it to predict. Facebook, therefore, has the means and opportunity to empower any attempt to influence behavior through information and or misinformation, whether by corporations or nations, whether honorable or nefarious. So I hope I've inspired you to think about and set the stage for the rest of our speakers to discuss the implications of Facebook in the context of national security.
Thank you, James. Now, Arnold, could you now provide us with a legal perspective?
Yes, so the question is, did someone break the law? If so, who? What law? And what is or what should be the punishment? And the answer, as most lawyers will tell you, is it depends. So Facebook is a global company. They have 2 billion users. Now, most of you know the population in the United States is much lower than 2 billion. So almost 90% of Facebook is not US users, international users. So in determining what should be done, it's really beyond just the United States. And laws differ by country, they differ by state. So figuring out how this would work its way out is very complex. So if you think I'm going to give you the answer, the end of the day, it's going to come back to it depends. And usually in any legal controversy, in order for there to be a controversy, there are two sides that believe strongly that they're right. And only until the judge gavel hits the table, the bench, is there an answer as to who was right and who was wrong. And in many cases, you end up getting a settlement agreement, and you never find out really who was right or who was wrong. You find out who is better at the game of chicken than the other. So with that, let me talk a little bit about privacy laws. And privacy, who here feels that what happened was wrong and that their privacy was invaded? Anybody? A few people. Maybe a lot of people don't have Facebook accounts. I just recently, 3 months ago, created my own Facebook account. So I'm not really a big Facebook user either, but there are 2 billion of them out there, even if there are not many in this room. So, but you all do have privacy concerns in your day-to-day life, and it's a big topic in America. And when most people think about privacy, they usually end up talking about the Fourth Amendment, the right to be free from unreasonable search in your papers as it was originally written in the Bill of Rights. But papers and effects now include your hard drive, your cell phone. But why is this not applicable? Because the Fourth Amendment is restrictions on what the government can do to us. It has nothing to do with what companies do and individuals do against each other in terms of violating their privacy. That's the first reason it's not applicable. The second reason it's not applicable, even if we were talking about the government, in privacy law and with the Fourth Amendment in particular, there's something called the third party doctrine. When you share information with a third party, you've basically said it's not private anymore. So if you use that as a basis, the fact that you're posting stuff on Facebook, you can then no longer claim some right to privacy. You've shared it with other people. In fact, 2 billion other people in this case, theoretically have access to it. So for those reasons, when we look at the evolution of privacy law, the Fourth Amendment isn't really helpful in getting an answer in this case. So now we look to tort law. Torts are individual wrongs between people and companies. And tort law in privacy has evolved. It's relatively recent, only about 100 years since we've talked about privacy torts. They include intrusion upon seclusion, public disclosure of private fact, false light, and appropriation of name or likeness. So again, did any of these seem to apply in this case? I would argue no, because it's not private, the information that you've put out there. Originally, these torts were conceived as one-on-one individual interactions. Now we're seeing more of mass data breaches and identity thefts through access to databases which have information like Social Security and personal identity information. But even so, when people try to launch lawsuits to say they've been wronged through massive class actions, we saw recently Equifax data breach is the biggest one. The judicial system is giving them a hard time. They're saying in order to have standing to bring a lawsuit, you must have a concrete and particularized harm. So let's go back to the example. You answered a survey, someone took your data. Well, where's the actual harm to you? Where's something specific that you can say you were harmed with? If you don't have that, then you can't bring a case in federal court. So now let's look at another area of law, contract law and consumer protection. And that's where we're getting close to maybe something was done wrong. So Facebook has a user agreement. If you use Facebook, you've done something called click wrap agreement. By clicking on the next button, next screen, you've agreed, you've signed a contract according to the law. And the law says they're going to use your data. They may not sell your data, but they'll use it to make money. They're a company. That's their job, is to make money, as David mentioned, fiduciary. They're not a nonprofit organization. They're a company. Anybody here remember reading their Facebook user agreement? Okay, so now the law says click wrap agreements are valid. you're not forced to sign them. You're not forced to use Facebook. You can walk away, even though you're bargaining. You don't really have much of a bargaining position. You can't tell them, well, I'll agree to X, Y, and Z, but scratch out A, B, and C. You either use it or you don't. But the law says you don't have to use it. Now, eventually that may change, because we'll get to the point where maybe you can't, how can you function without using Facebook? But we're not there yet. On the other hand, the data tells us, there have been studies that in order for an average person to read all of their privacy agreements would take 76 business days a year. So we know for a fact people are not reading their privacy agreements unless they don't have much else to do. So in fact, I'll save the quotes because I want to save time, but we know people are not reading the agreements. So the other thing we know is that Facebook got in trouble before for very much what happened here. Because these contracts they're not contracts of adhesion, which mean you have no chance, but they are pretty one-sided. So the government steps in to help, and they help with the Federal Trade Commission, which most people might think Federal Communications Commission, but no. Federal Trade Commission is responsible for protecting consumers against unfair and deceptive trade practices. And they have stepped into this role of looking at companies' privacy policies. So they looked at Facebook's privacy policy back in 2011 because of some complaints, and they said, you're not really doing what you're saying you're doing. And there was a settlement. So it never got ruled on by a judge, but Facebook agreed not to pay any money, but to agree to a consent decree, which means they will be monitored for a 20-year period of what they're doing. And that included a whole bunch of things and puts them under the microscope. So here they're already in the penalty box, and this comes up. So what happened? FTC has announced they are doing an investigation. It is not a public investigation, so we're not going to hear the details of it. It could take years before we get a result. It'll probably end up in a settlement. And what will happen? It depends. But most experts say there probably will be a fine against Facebook for this. Won't be too big a fine. Might be big for us, but to Facebook it won't be too big. We're a multi-billion-dollar company because they're not trying to put Facebook out of business. They're just trying to penalize them for having a lax privacy policy. When Mark Zuckerberg testified, he said he's sorry, but he didn't admit any liability. He believes they did not violate the consent agreement, although he didn't have a lot of the details down on the agreement. He didn't know if his company had already been fined by the FTC, for example. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But I would argue that how it plays out is just a piece in an evolving story. And the way Dave described the opening remarks, I'm going to bet he's read this book, The Circle, because it's a vision of a dystopian future as to what could happen if we make the wrong decisions going forward. Because our privacy laws are evolving. As a society, we're making decisions on what the law should be, what the law shouldn't be. And if we make the wrong decisions, things could go down the wrong way. So that's the legal perspective.
Thank you, Arnold. Priscilla, would you give us your perspective from a society and national security perspective?
Sure. I'm going to talk just a minute at the personal level and then at the national level. And at the personal level, I think David used the word the other day, the tensions. And the tensions are interesting. So I absolutely love the fact that Amazon's going to send me stuff in advance and I don't have to shop and I'll just wear whatever they tell me to wear. Yes. Okay. But I also don't want Amazon sharing, this is very personal now, my clothing size, because I don't want the insurance people to say, wow, she's kind of fat. Maybe we should jack up her insurance rates. So interesting tensions. I'm lazy. I love the fact that they could make my life easy, but I worry about it. And I have some other stories about that. But, you know, as I get older, my family has dementia, and I go, wow, This is not a good thing to have people with dementia out there preyed upon and, buying islands or whatever. So how's that going to work as my generation gets older? Now I'm going to talk a little bit at the national level. I have mostly questions, and I know we're supposed to have answers, but we don't have answers. I think this is the most exciting time because we have these questions and we have an opportunity to figure out what this means for us and how we evolve. So when I look at the national level, I have one of the same concerns that I have at a personal level. My dad used to make us read the Washington Star and the Post, and we had to read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And he felt that that gave us sort of a balanced view. How do I ensure as a person, but how do we ensure as a society that we continue to get balanced views in a time when trending makes it possible to basically overwhelm our input with stories, and that we have no way to know whether the stories are real, people are talking about them. We've even got cases now where journalists are using the trending stories as a basis for reporting, and that's very dangerous. So how do we do this? Make sure that we have good information at scale and at speed. And to add to that, this is not a political statement, but we already have gerrymandered districts where debate isn't as essential as it was in the past. Now you can mass customize news. That's what we're talking about with Facebook. We can do it at the individual level and individual by issue. And so will that take away from the requirement that we debate and do the kinds of things that made this form of governance wonderful, have the compromise and debate to come up with best solutions? And then when you talk about companies, there's a book on this, and Margaret made me go to an ISAT, and they talked about it. There have been social constructs for years between pools of people, different government constructs, pools of people and a leader. And basically you trade some privacy for security. But there's never been a lasting social construct for multinationals. So when you look at multinationals, and we're talking about, as Arnold said, multinational organizations, how does that fit? How do we govern it? How do we work with it? What do they follow? If you look at GDPR and what they're doing in Europe, it establishes, I think, a basis for dialogue. I always say we need a national dialogue on this, but perhaps it's an international dialogue because multinationals are so large, wield so much influence, and we have to figure out how we deal with them and how we respond. Okay, and then let's talk briefly about governance. There was a stunning example in 2009 where a company came in and showed us how it was actually, they used the names of the companies, I won't, but they're big multinationals, how a rollout hadn't gone well. They looked at the social media and they changed the nature of the PR. And you could see in one case, I called them twits and tweets, we can't say that anymore, but the social media changed dramatically within 30 minutes. In the other case, it took 2 days. It was a slightly different situation. But wow, that's influence operations. And how are we going to respond? When we look at DOD, let's talk very specifically, and this is not about the current policy. I think the current policy of nothing in the Pentagon is a good policy. But when the military can't use the same tools that everyone else is using, does that handicap them? There's a stunning book. It's not a great read. Clint Watt's new book on messing with the enemy talks about how social media changed terrorist organizations from disseminating information and fomenting unrest to actually governing. And you read that and you go, wow, the agility, the ability to do things quickly, how is our military going to adopt and do that when some of the tools and techniques aren't available to us? And then we look at the broader governance, goes back to my comment with Senator Stevens. Is it going to change? People don't ride off on horseback to Washington anymore. The immediacy and velocity of information. And then one last thing, and I'll be quiet. Margaret Myers notes that her division works across the legal policy, operations, business, and technology seams. And that's where we have to be. We have to be able to communicate effectively across those seams to make this work.
Thank you for starting us off so well. That was a very powerful and articulate set of presentations. So now I want to move to the second phase where I'm going to ask some specific questions. We're going to start tactically. So the first question is very practical, and I'll start by directing this to you, James. If we have a Facebook account, what can or should we do to protect our information?
What do you mean by protect?
Oh, you know, you didn't read the instructions. The questions are supposed to go this way. What can I do? So what do I mean by protect? Basically, I don't want to be harmed, okay, by the data that I've emitted.
So it sounds like you want to protect yourself, not your information.
Correct.
I wanted to draw that distinction because I don't know what it means exactly to protect information, except to make sure that the disks it's on are not destroyed. When I hear something like protect information, I translate that to something like protect a person from their information being released to some party that they don't want it to be released to. Okay. The best way to do that, if you have a Facebook account, is to not use the internet. Yeah, some people laughed, some people didn't. The people who didn't laugh, you understand what I'm saying. If you use the internet, you will be releasing your information to various parties. Not just Facebook. Your ISP. The NSA. Right? And any organization that operates the website websites that you access. Right? Your information is going to be out there. That is something that you agree to when you agree to use the internet. When you walk down the street, you agree that people will be able to watch you walk down the street. Okay? On the internet, the ability to observe you and things about you and things about what you are doing is vastly increased. But I think the same concept applies. Now I can be a little less dismal, right? I'll give it a shot. Okay. Now you have some control over, so given that you're going to use the internet, right? Oh well. You can some control over where you go, right? You have and you have some control over how you do it, right? You can use a VPN, but that's not going to stop whoever you are giving your information to, so that you can access their website, from getting that information, right? It's just going to stop them from getting your IP address, from third parties, from men in the middle, from getting your IP address. That's small potatoes compared to what we're talking about with all of the information that you put on your Facebook profile. Right? You can limit what information you put on your Facebook profile. And the rest of it, Facebook will try to infer about you using predictive algorithms and using information about your friends. So they might be wrong. And what's going to come of that? Well, you're going to see less relevant ads. So if that's what you wanted, if you wanted to see less relevant ads, then congratulations. But also, if there happens to be a huge breach, then less is going to come out about you, and it's going to be harder to steal your identity.
Thank you. Let me follow up. You had the phrase, which is one of my favorites, which is just because you don't have an account with Facebook doesn't mean they don't have an account on you. So is there anything, if I do not have a Facebook account, is there anything I need to be worried about because I have no people who do?
Worried about. So if there's a big data breach, you could get your identity stolen, right? It would be, depending on where the breach came from, like if it came from Facebook, then it would be harder to steal your identity than the identity of someone who gave Facebook a bunch of information. But there's still information on you out there from that Facebook has, from every website that you access that has a like button, or a Facebook pixel, which is something that businesses can use with one click. And they can agree with Facebook to install a Facebook pixel on their website, which will track things like accessing a certain page or buying certain items on that website, or app downloads, all kinds of things. And you don't have to have a Facebook account at all.
Dave, this brings to mind something that is an evolution in the privacy laws. It's something called a right to be forgotten. Because as you said, not only is the data out there, But once it's out there, you can't get it back in. So there have been lawsuits where people have sued Google, for example, to say when someone does a search, they get this article that was written 20 years ago that has since been corrected, and it's causing them trouble, and they want that deleted. But it's very complicated because is it up to Google? Google's just giving the answer to what happened in the search. Do they have to go back to everybody who has promulgated that information? It's an impossible task, but it's one of the things that privacy experts are advancing, is this right to be forgotten.
Thank you. You know, you commented, Arnold, that that decisions weren't made until the judge's gavel came down. So that reminded me there'd been a recent case in the Supreme Court, Carpenter versus the US, in which there was a 5-4 decision about whether somebody's records from where they traveled, which was used to incriminate them in a series of crimes, could be used. And the 5-4 decision said that this was indeed an invasion of that, person's privacy. I'm asking this question because is there something that has actually changed? Because in the decision from that, the judge commented, and I'll get this right, is that previously if someone has no expectation in privacy in records they agreed to turn over to somebody else, the point that you made, but there's a change in the quantity of the data, which means there's a new class of information which must be treated differently. Please comment.
What it comes down to is big data, and that's what we're really talking about. When you like an individual thing or you buy one thing in a store, who cares? It's worthless. But when you can accumulate that and do analytics on it, it becomes valuable big data. And we've been talking about big data for a while, but now we're finally seeing the operationalization of big data and the commercialization of big data. So, I mean, there's been a line of cases that have been getting us in this direction where, for example, as you talk about, when you go on the street, people can watch you. But does that mean that the government can access your GPS and know every single place you've gone over a period of a year and do analysis of it? Well, that's a little bit more than just watching you as you're going from place to place. So what this case is telling us is that there is a line that can be crossed. And just because you put information out there doesn't mean that it's totally free game to the government because of the Fourth Amendment. But what private sector can do with it, again, is a different story. That's between individual contracts, agreements. So it applies, it shows where we're thinking privacy-wise, but you have to realize there's a big gap between what we hold. This country holds the government to a much higher standard than it holds individuals to. So that's something to consider as well.
I'd like to invite either of the other of you to comment. Has something changed, and what is that specifically?
I just would make a comment. I agree with Arnold. You always agree with the lawyers, right? So I agree with Arnold. I think that the interesting thing is that you hear dialogue, people saying companies should be held to a higher standard, and in some cases a standard that's above what the government has set. And I'm appalled by that. The idea that we would ask companies to go and set a standard for the country strikes me as not a reasonable thing to do. So we need the dialogue, we need to keep informing, but I think it's great that the government has the higher standard right now.
About something changing. So ads have been around for a long time, and advertisers have wanted to target ads for a long time, for decades and decades. And now they can do it way, way, way better than they could before. Before, you could advertise on a single TV channel because, you're trying to target middle-aged males, and so you advertise on ESPN, right? And today you can do that much, 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 much better. You can go down to the individual level and choose who you want to target. And it's so easy with Facebook, right? You're just pulling down menus of I want males, 45 to 54, and you just go on down. 50 miles from this zip code, right? That's one thing that has changed.
Thank you. So One of the things we've been talking about is whether the existing regulations, laws, and societal savvy are sufficient to deal with this. So the question is, I mean, there are different parties involved here. You have the people who collect data, right? You have the people who analyze data, and then you have the people who use that information for effect. Who should be targeted? What should our strategy be, and who should it be directed against?
One class person you didn't mention was the people who provide the data in the first place.
Agreed. Thank you.
So that would be my answer. I'll write in that answer. Right. Because...
you are stretching the bounds of these moderated sessions.
If I had the answer, I wouldn't be here. I'd be either in the White House or in Zuckerberg's mansion. But I can tell you that, for example, the Europeans, they are taking. Originally, privacy was an American thing, but now it's shifted. Europe is more serious about privacy, and they've said they're going to have a 4% fine, potentially 4% of global revenue. Now, most companies, that's a big part of their revenue, or and bigger than their profit margin. It'll put them out of business. So they're making this very serious. So that's an idea of where to go. But most Americans see ourselves as different than Europeans, and we have different societal mores. So whether we'll go that far, I don't know.
So I think one of the most interesting discussions that we have ahead of us is for the Department of Defense in the area that used to be and now isn't so much and is coming back is influence operations. Now we have Cyber Command that's going to be a unified command in relatively short order, it looks. And the question is, how does influence operations fit or not fit? And how does the government feel about that? How do they deal with it? The government is certainly the recipient of actions by others to influence. And at least we need to understand it. We may not use it, but at least we need to understand it. But it's an entirely different era with different parameters, this competition in the gray zone. And I think it's going to be a fascinating dialogue and fraught with all of the difficulties of what we do and what we don't do and what's appropriate for government and what's not.
Thank you. Actually, that brings up the question. I'd posed, how could this become a threat to democracy? So even if we don't use these tools, we have to be aware that they could be used.
Yes.
And so what things we should be thinking about to protect ourselves? I'll direct that to you first, please.
Okay, so I think back to Margaret's division, that we absolutely have to get more people who understand how to work in the seams of technology, policy and law, and operations and business. And I put business in the direct sense, not just DoD business, but commercial business as well. If we don't have people who can work across those seams, we will have crummy policy. I just believe that with all my heart. And yet I talk to so many technologists that don't want to talk policy and don't want to have to cross the divide and talk outside their geek speak area. And I think that's a danger for us. And so I think the focus in that area is imperative. And I look at DoD and I go, wow, we're talking kinetic primarily, but influence operations is a reality. So how is the government going to engage and what will DoD's role be? I think those are places to push.
Any comments from the other two? Or?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. All those people who aren't doing that stuff get paid 5 times as much and get 5 times the mental simulation working at Facebook.
Thank you. Beyond the regulations and laws, there may be some changes to the structure of societal networks. I went to a presentation recently where they talked about when the internet was founded, they did a lot of things right as far as setting up protocols for transferring information. But one thing that the speaker, at any rate, said that they did wrong was, in essence, identity management. Okay? And so now you have a situation where if you're a Facebook customer, all right, it's not easy for you to transport your identity from one social network to another. It was suggested in this presentation I went to, they used the word blockchain. that this might be something which, in fact, could be used to protect or allow you to transport identity, and would therefore allow you to vote with your feet. If you didn't like Facebook, you could leave and still have a social network. I'll address this to you first. Is there any hope of this? And you're not allowed to ask a question.
Yeah, there's hope. And in fact, on Facebook right now, you can download all of your data from Facebook. There's an option to do that. Once you elect to take that option, Facebook says you have to wait a few hours, then we'll email you when your file's ready. I don't know exactly why that is. You can imagine different reasons why that might be. But really, your social identity is a text file and a folder of pics and videos. So that's pretty transferable. But if you're going to talk about modularity and interoperability of different social network systems, they don't really have an incentive to work with each other. Hypothetically, every car maker could make all of their parts work with every other type of car, right? Why doesn't that happen? Well, they're all their own firms, right? They want to sell their cars and their car parts. But in this context, actually, there's more hope than in that context because your social identity is a simple thing.
Perhaps. So building on that point, then, that the companies don't have the incentive to do this. This might be where I believe the economists maybe have some market failure.
Well said.
Thank you. And so is there some role for the government? I'll offer this in insisting on something.
So I don't know about a role for the government, but I thought it was an interesting question. He posed the question to us, and I thought, "Ooh, this is wonderful. Now I can have many different personas, and I can operate entirely different in every network." And so I don't know if that's good or bad. It's interesting. There's a good side and there's a bad side. There's a downside to everything. So yes, okay, I understand. I can download all my Facebook stuff and I could transport it. But if you make it so that it's not findable, then you give me a wonderful opportunity to be multiple people to do different things in different venues.
Thank you. Arnold?
It's the law, when it comes up with an answer, usually pendulum swings from one extreme to the other, and the risk is, okay, we want more privacy, we want more anonymization. Actually, we're the opposite way right now. We're saying there's too much anonymization. We want more openness, which means less privacy. So it swings. It's a Damocles sword. But you should read this book if you want to know what happens if you make the wrong decisions.
Thank you. We have about 5 or 10 minutes left, and so what I want to do is I want to transition this to questions. We have 2 mics. If you'd like to make your way to one of those, and then while people are doing that, getting themselves organized, I'll ask a question that people did send to me in advance, and that is, at what point, you talked about advertising, that's been going on for a long time, and clearly that is psychological manipulation, right? So at what point does it cease to be promotion or exposure to products and ideas and become something much more harmful?
When it counters or conceals the truth.
Okay, that's fair. Anybody? Okay. All right. Well, I was going to have a difficult choice of mics, but it appears as though this one is the one. So, Larry?
Hi. First, I'd like to back to the Cambridge Analytica aspect of this thing, not just what Facebook does to make money, but how it enters politics. Do you think that there is a way, either technically or legally, or some combination of the two, to reel this back so what may or may not have happened with Brexit and other things like that, where there was external influence? Can you make that like not happen again? Or is this one of these things that it's like the genie's out of the bottle and now it's just now it's up to like everybody to get these new weapons and to use them accordingly? I mean, which way do you think we should go?
I'll address that because it's part of a huge debate that's been going on in this country about campaign financing and freedom of speech, and is money speech, because that's really what I see it as translating to, because technology and money, if you have techniques, should you be limited in what techniques you have available is similar to saying if you have money, should you be limited in how much money you can spend. And it's a very complicated issue that is more political than legal, and depending on how we want to go forward. But right now we're in the direction of saying free, it's open season, can do whatever you want practically.
These tools are about targeting, right? Like before, even if I don't have all the data from the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right, and I want to just run an ad on Facebook to try to convince people of something, I could do it. It's just that maybe I wouldn't be able to target it as well, and so it would cost me more money to reach the same number of vulnerable people, right? So it's really just a matter of saving me money by allowing me to have a more targeted ad, but that's not trivial, right? Because if we're limiting money or in some fashions, then it's very important that I save money and can have more targeted ad campaigns. Okay.
Up until now, the discussion has focused on human users like you and me. What about bots?
Well, computers are not subject to the law since they're not persons, but there's ultimately a user behind it. So that's the way the law would treat it.
And I don't know that it's that different than just saying there are analytics and the ability to do all sorts of targeting that wasn't possible before. It speeds it up and does it at scale and does it more cost effectively, but it's computing.
Right. When I think about bots, I think about, for example, Twitter bots, right? This is something different from the Cambridge Analytica thing where you're trying to find people to target. This is having accounts that create messages that are not really targeted because you're just putting a tweet out there, but you're using bots to do it en masse. This is a different issue, but it strikes similar themes about information and misinformation and the use of broadcasting mechanisms with technology. And so some of the stuff we're talking about today applies there, and some of it doesn't.
Hello, good afternoon. Extending the scenario further on than Facebook, and also saying if I already go into Google, if I want to look up some shoes, maybe the next time I go onto a different website, that same advertisement is going to pop up. So you said that there's no true answer for Facebook. If this is illegal for Facebook to do it, what about another country doing this to Americans and changing the way we potentially vote? Would that be illegal?
Well, now you're crossing into international law as what are countries allowed to do to each other. And it's a whole nother realm. And countries traditionally, I mean, we're all upset about Russia interfering in our election, but countries traditionally try to influence each other. And we talk about influence operations. That's a classic thing. It's also known as diplomacy. So again, you're going to do it. It's been being done from time immemorial. The question is, do you do it with the advanced tools and techniques, or do you do it with sticks and stones in the ancient times? So it's again, it depends. I mean, are they asking you, are they putting up a false flag and they pretending they're someone else and going into your data without you clicking I acknowledge, then that's probably not allowed. But if they're just doing passive collection and passive influence, it's open game.
So I would just add that I think this brings up the complexity of the multinationals and how we work with multinationals in this environment, which I think adds to the complexity. But I agree, nations have been doing this forever. And the question is, how do we want to do it? How do we want to engage? I think knowing about the technologies is the starting point.
Am I supposed to have a comment on this? Because you asked if it was legal. I'm not a lawyer, so I won't try to answer that. But I think about nations being not so special anymore, right? Still special, but not so special anymore. In that, never in history have we had had entities other than nations and maybe religions with the power of information and collection and broadcasting. Now it is a firm that has this power, and that's unprecedented in human history. So I definitely don't know if it's legal, and I don't know what it's going to mean for our society.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, with that, we are out of time. We've covered a lot of territory today. I don't know whether this event will be a tipping point. Could be. But I do know that I learned a lot of stuff today, and I would like you to thank the panelists along with me.